Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at chapter 1043 of One Piece, which a lot of things happened in, as it has been for the last little while. We really haven't had much in the way of a break in the last little while, except for the break that we're on this week, which is unfortunate, but luckily does give me time to get this chapter review out, albeit a little bit later than I would like, but still well before the next chapter comes out, which is nice in some ways, I suppose. But let's get into it. So at the beginning of this chapter, we have a continuation, obviously, of last chapter of Kaido absolutely flattening Luffy because of the intervention of the CP0 mask guy. We still don't really have a name for this guy, but it doesn't really matter because, yeah, he's pretty much dead in my view as of this chapter. And I'm going to break down a little bit more as to why I think this, which is also why I think that Luffy has died in this chapter, which is huge news, considering big news, considering he's the shonen protagonist, and when he's doing his last attack, he's supposed to actually win, and he's supposed to take down the big bad guy, but that didn't happen. So, what did happen? Well, Kaido smashes him down with his Roaring Thunder Bagua, which is a really cool move, by the way, and the mask guy instantly knows what is happening. And so does the Sunflower guy, the other CP0 agent who's in that indestructible waiting room that they've been chilling in for a while. And they just kind of have a little thought bubble about noticing that Luffy has been absolutely destroyed on the roof. And what's very interesting about that particularly is he also has a moment like this for CP0 Mask Guy. And this is just before Momo says Luffy's voice is gone. His voice, his haki or his spirit, his presence is no longer there, which is very important to mention. So Luffy drops to the ground. The CP0 Sunflower guy recognizes that Luffy has dropped to the ground. Kaido has a little bit of a moment. He is a lot less angry than I thought he would be, given what happened last chapter. He seems pretty relaxed about the whole thing, to be honest, which I found a little bit interesting, but not, no, it didn't really detract from anything. I just thought he'd be in more of a rage than he was. He was pretty stoic about the whole thing, raises his Kanabo, and flattens the guy. The CP0 mask guy is very calm about the whole thing as well. He just tips his hat and waits for inevitable death. One way I can see why he would do this is because it's Kaido, and the reason he was objecting to this order in the last chapter is because it's Kaido and Luffy. Really not a fight you want to get between, whether you know about Kaido's whole defeating someone properly thing or not. Interfering that fight is just not a good idea regardless of that. But he did, so he knows what's coming, and there's no point running away from Kaido because what are you going to do? Geppo your way down to the mainland Wano, where he's about to drop the island anyway. I think he just accepts it. I did have a thought about maybe he has some kind of telepathic connection or some kind of way of communicating with the CP0 guy who's in the other room, but why would they need Denden Mushis if they could do that? Because they needed to call each other before, so I don't think they're really communicating with each other, despite them both tipping their hats in this chapter. I think it is just a mark of respect given that he is most likely dead right now. And the more in-depth reason why I think he's dead is because of CP0 Sunflower. We also don't have a name for him, so Sunflower it is. And the fact that we have multiple people in this chapter confirming that Luffy's voice has disappeared is very, very interesting. We have Law later on in the chapter, who I didn't know had the ability. I kind of assume it has something to do with observation haki. It might not have to do with the voice of all things necessarily. I think when Luffy was talking to everyone on the island, especially while he was underwater, that had to do with the voice of all things. I think Law's here might just have to do with his observation haki, but I'm not entirely certain about that. What I did find interesting, though, is the number of people in this chapter who must be able to hear those voices. Not that hearing voices is always a good thing, but in this case it is, I promise. So we have Kaido flattening Luffy onto the ground, where he then flies up into the air, and while he's flying up into the air, Momo says Luffy's voice has disappeared. Luffy then lands back down on the roof, and Kaido doesn't need to hit him again. He just turns to the CP0 guy and kills him too. I really do think that Luffy has died here, but we'll get into that later. A lot of things going on here. So, Luffy gets flattened, and Kaido doesn't even have a second of hesitation. He just thinks that Luffy is dead, or knows that he's dead, given that there is a silence sound effect above Luffy when he's been flattened. And the Sunflower Guy notices this. The Sunflower Guy also noticed that Luffy's voice disappeared. Later on the chapter, Law disappeared. So we have Momo confirmed and Law confirmed to have noticed that his voice is gone. But then the people that didn't verbalize this or vocalize this would be Kaido and the CP0 Sunflower Guy, and obviously the Mask Guy who's right there, possibly Kid as well. So there could have been a total of 6 people who noticed that Luffy's voice disappeared. And that's why I think that Kaido definitely thought that Luffy was dead, because he noticed his voice disappearing after he hit him with the Kanabo, which is really big because, Luffy dying isn't really something that I thought we'd get in this chapter. I thought he'd get back up because he's made of rubber and always gets back up and defeats the enemy. But I guess this chapter is also telling us pretty definitively that the fruit that the Gorosei were talking about a few chapters ago was definitely Luffy's fruit. I can't really see what happened at the end of the chapter as being anything other than awakening, but I also don't really know what it could be. But we'll get to those things just now. So after the fight and Luffy dying on the roof, which is not ideal, Kaido comes crashing through the ceiling and starts wiping people out as the progression of his plan, and saying that he's going to drop Onigashima again soon. Just before this happens, though, we have Kawamatsu talking about how there are still thousands of people in the island and a lot of people are going to burn to death, and that there's no honor in burning to death, which I found kind of interesting because of the whole thing that we had with Raizo up until recently, which honestly went on for like 30-something chapters, not consecutively, but it was a long time and quite a cool thing for Raizo to do, to outlast Fukurokuju in that blazing battle. But apparently there's no honor in burning to death, so I'm glad that Raizo survived and Fukurokuju probably didn't, but that's just how that goes. I also found it very particularly interesting that he mentioned we're up in the sky and there is no water here. Now, these are two very obvious things. We've been in the sky for a very long time now, and we know there's no water here, nor is there any water anywhere around us. But the fact that he so specifically mentions that the fire is getting even further out of control and there is no water here seems like there's going to be a little bit more of a payoff to that. Now, how that actually comes about, there are a lot of different ways to go. Maybe the hole that was shot all the way down is going to have water rushing up in it. That would have drowned Big Mom, though, so I don't really know about that. But needless to say, there are a lot of different ways to interpret this. I just think it's very interesting that he mentioned it in the way that he did, in the way that Oda kind of made that stand out a little bit for me. So Kaido comes crashing in, Boro-breathing everyone, kind of just lighting everyone up, calling for Momonosuke to come forward and surrender, which seems a bit odd. He doesn't seem to know that Momonosuke is just underneath the island, pulling it further away. Not that he would sense it through the flame clouds or anything, but I don't know. I kind of just thought he would have noticed that from the conversation that the others were having before, but it's okay. He is just calling for it to happen in front of everyone regardless, so that the fighting can come to an end, and he's just going to drop Onigashima onto the flower capital as quickly as he can. And I think it's really cool that Nami is the first person to outright exclaim that Kaido must be lying. There's no way that Luffy has died. This can't be true. And when I was chatting to one of my friends a little while ago after the chapter came out, he mentioned something very interesting about Nami has never been wrong about Luffy's health condition or something along those lines, which I thought was pretty interesting. But obviously Luffy is not permanently dead here, but I do think that Luffy did die in this chapter for various reasons that are yet to be explained. But I think it's very cool that Nami has now stood up to two of the strongest people in the world, two of the strongest pirates in the entire world. She has stood up for not necessarily always her crewmate or the right thing, I suppose, but she is standing up to these emperors nonetheless, where not even 50 chapters ago, to be generous, she had that whole moment with Frankie where Frankie said, don't you want him to be the pirate king, and that whole situation there. So I think it's really cool that she's starting to internalize that and starting to change her mindset, despite how, glass cannony and kind of weak she actually is. I mean, she's strong in terms of attack, but she can't take that many hits. I mean, she survived ulti, but still. Anyway, we're getting a bit off track, so let's get back to it. I do like that Marco springs into action to protect her. I don't know what kind of level Marco has always been on. I kind of think that this isn't really stretching the limits of what he can do. I just think it's very interesting that he can quite handily block a borrow breath from Kaido, which is a pretty insanely powerful move. But he comes to the rescue and saves Nami, which is great. Then they have a very big discussion about being slaves and how Kaido is pretty much an evil guy and he's going to just enslave everyone here. I don't know how he's going to do that, because if he's planning on dropping the island, pretty much everyone's going to die. I don't know how Kaido doesn't know this. He knows about the armory. He's probably a lot less drunk now. I don't know why Kaido thinks dropping the island on the Flower Capital would do anything other than explode it and kill everyone, slaves and allies alike. So I don't really know what he's thinking or why he thinks that this will work, or if maybe he's got a plan that will stop that from happening, but he's kind of going ahead with it. The thing that this does make me think is the fact that dropping it would kill everyone, including Kaido's allies, means that Luffy or someone on Luffy's side is going to do something that will prevent the explosion or prevent the falling. Now, if Momonosuke could conjure enough flame clouds and big enough flame clouds, he could just consistently keep the thing flying. Or maybe he's had enough time to make smaller ones. I think he just kind of abandoned that plan and went to the whole pulling Onigashima out the way thing. But I think the fact that Onigashima is imminently going to fall on the Flower Capital again now, as it's been stated, means that something else is going to happen that's going to stop it. What I originally used to think, and the end of this chapter kind of shines a little bit of doubt on that, was the rubber world thing that I mentioned a couple chapters ago, that Luffy will be able to turn other things around him into rubber or will make them bouncy. And he might be able to do this to the whole of Onigashima, so when it drops, Onigashima would bounce. I don't really see too many things that connect us to that, to be honest, as we've gotten closer and closer to the island actually dropping, but I do think it would be really cool. I don't really think it would stop the explosion because of how bounciness works, but I would be very happy to see Onigashima bouncing, especially because it's a very wacky thing for Luffy to do. It's not a very traditional way of stopping the impending disaster, as we've called it, but it would be very Oda and very Luffy, and I think that would be great. So just before we get near the end of the chapter, we've got Kaido attacking and Kaido's remaining beast pirates attacking Kid and Law. And just as they are still so exhausted, but they are still willing to try and fight in some way, given that Kaido is there, they don't really have much of a choice. But I found it very interesting that when Kid and Law's subordinates came in to save them, Jean Bart saved Kid and leather jacket guy that I've never seen or known the name of before. I don't even think he was in the crew before Onigashima, at least halfway through the raid, but he saves Law. And I think it's very cool that they save each other's captains. I don't really know why they do that. They would have been closer to their own captain, I'm sure, given the number of times they were trying to protect them, but it's a very cool moment nonetheless. So then we see Neko Mamushi and Carrot running towards this to try and help them, which may be quite helpful, but it does explain where they were recently in the other chapter, moving away from the edge and closer into the island, what Oda was setting up for them coming in now. I still don't really see where they'd be going, where they can really fit in. I don't think these two can hold down Kaido very well at all, unless they go straight into Sulong form, because there's still a hole in the ceiling. Then they might be able to slightly damage him, because he's taken a good beating up until now. But we saw almost every single capable fighter, or I guess they're all capable fighters, but we saw almost all of the minks attacking Kaido before Luffy got up to the roof, and they didn't really get very far. Sure, they're a cannon fodder in the way, but still. I don't know where Nekomamushi is going with this, but I'm excited to see him at least fight somebody, because I do quite like him. He's a cool cat, literally. So everything's on fire, everyone's dying. Even Law is starting to see that Luffy has been taken out, which is not ideal. They've both started to just kind of lose faith in him entirely, which makes sense given Kaido was the one that came down that hole, which, look, when they mentioned it, I thought that's a bit of a weird thing to say, but what are the chances that Kaido's going to come back down through that hole? That wouldn't happen. It's a shonen. Well, here we are. Oda subverting our expectations just again, which I think is really cool. I think he's a very good writer. I'm just pretty interested to see where all of this goes. So here we have the namesake of the chapter in Momonosuke faltering as he was before about what to do now in the current situation. Before, he wasn't even sure if he wanted to open the borders because of everything that might incur. Now, the fact that Luffy has been taken out, he completely thinks that the only thing he really has left to do is surrender. Yamato, of course being Odin, does do the thing that I thought she would do, in that she gives Momonosuke the right words of encouragement to do the thing that he needs to do, whatever it is. And here is that moment. Here is Yamato reaffirming the values of the people of Wano, a people that she isn't actually even related to. She's only just lived here for the past 20 years or so, which, probably has citizen rights by now. Not that that really matters to Kaido and the rest of his family, but she's not even a person that comes from Wano. She just lives on Onigashima. In fact, I don't think she's really been to Wano outside the execution of Odin. Don't really know how she managed that, but somehow she did, given that she had the shackles on. But whatever. The thing that she does talk to Momo here about is the samurai spirit and the willingness to die fighting for a cause that you believe in, and don't do the same thing that the people of Wano 20 years ago did and regretted into their graves because it's still trapped and oppressed their country over the last 2 decades. Or a score, which is what a score is, from the 4 score. It doesn't matter. So I think it's just a really great moment between the two of them, reaffirming the spirit of both of them and their purposes as characters in a lot of ways and what they need to do now. Meaning that I guess Momonosuke is going to go and attempt to attack Kaido. Maybe he'll use a borrow breath. I'm pretty excited for him to have other powers, but we'll see what's going on. Now, the big moment at the end of the chapter, or the big few moments at the end of the chapter, I'm going to have to make some kind of other videos of the next couple days before the next chapter comes out to try and talk about these kinds of things. But we have a nice zoomed out view of Onigashima from the front, where we can just hear the noises of battle. We can just hear cries and screams and people burning to death, most likely. We can hear a lot of things. And we begin to zoom in on Luffy, his corpse. It's literally just his corpse because he's flat dead right now, unfortunately. And then we get a few sound effects of ba-bump, his heart beginning to beat again. And Zunisha notices this from really far away and says to Momonosuke, I can hear it. It's been such a long time, but I can hear the drums of liberation. For the first time in 800 years, he is here. And I really enjoyed this part of the chapter because this was a huge moment. Because Momonosuke asks, who is here? And Zunisha says, Joy Boy has returned. And we just see Luffy grinning with the sound effect for Nika and his hair melting into some kind of goo or liquidy substance. And there's a lot of things going on here. I don't even know where to begin with this, but I've had a few days to kind of mull this over and hear a few other opinions and things like that. And I'm going to go through a few things that I'm concerned about, and I'm going to go over a few things that I think or believe up till now. So there is a lot of concern about how One Piece is going to go due to this, and what it really means for Joy Boy to be here, because it's huge for a character that was first mentioned probably for the first time on the poneglyph in Fishman Island just after the time skip. The significance of seeing Joy Boy or hearing Joy Boy or both in the next chapter is absolutely wild. We may spend a bit of time cutting to Kaido, also noticing Joy Boy being here, which is another thing. What is Kaido going to do when he comes face to face with the literal, actual Joy Boy? But one of the big concerns that a lot of people have, and I guess I kind of felt this as well, was we don't want it to turn into Naruto. We don't want it to turn into, if you haven't watched Naruto, he was the chosen one all along, and within him dwells the spirit of, the prophesized one who will come through and take over the world or whatever it needs to be. Which would detract from Luffy being the guy who is actually the one to do all this, the guy who has a terrible devil fruit and works really hard and goes against the odds and, you know, is the one to overthrow the world, which would be somewhat lessened and a little bit disingenuous if his body was just inhabited by Joy Boy, and that's why he's strong enough, and that's the reason why all of this is occurring, and that's the reason why he can beat Kaido, is because, oh, well, either his devil fruit is Joy Boy, or he directly inherited the will of Joy Boy because he died here at Wano, which, now that I think about it, might also connect Ryuma and Zoro, because Luffy's dead and Zoro might be dead, and they might reawaken as Ryuma and Joy Boy respectively, which would be very cool. But I think a lot of people would feel really weird about that and wouldn't really enjoy that in the story. I'm a huge fan of One Piece, as you can probably tell. I'm starting a whole channel about that, or part of the channel being about that. And most of what Oda does, I'm pretty fine with, because it's his story and it's very compelling and it's very well written. And I really trust that Oda knows what he's doing, especially after 25 years almost. He knows his audience, he knows how we'll react to a large degree, and he knows how to play the game. But, you know, he can still make weird decisions and he can still throw us off, so we'll see what happens. Regardless of any souls of any Joy Boys, Luffy is melting, which is very interesting, which is very cool, which is very confusing. Because I heard a lot of people mentioning, oh, even his straw hat is melting, but he's not wearing his straw hat on his head unless between the panels he put it on. Here he's clearly lying on top of his straw hat. It's his hair that's changing into this weird liquid and he just seems to be melting away. Now, a few ways that you could take this would be he could have Logia powers now. He could be awakening to his true powers. He could be awakening his Gear 5th. He could have a different understanding of how his fruit works. Joy Boy awakening could have changed how the fruit works. There are a lot of different ways to interpret this. We're going to have to wait until clarity next week. But the big thing to understand here is something really big has changed with regards to Luffy, and his soul, his body, his devil fruit, his entire being in a certain sense has changed. And it's also very interesting that the grin is an onomatopoeia of Nika, which is the sun god Nika that we had referenced by Who's Who. And that ties into Jinbei and the Sun Pirates and Fisher Tiger and the sun symbol that they have branded over the Celestial Dragon's mark, and the sun god Nika being the one who can alleviate your pain and suffering and make you laugh and free you. And there's a lot of things to unpack here, but the kind of general vibe that I'm getting out of this is that Luffy, Joy Boy, and Nika are all one in the same. Not that they're the same being, but essentially they might as well be. Way back in the Ancient Kingdom, whether that was 800 years ago with Joy Boy or further beyond that, Nika could have either been how people interpreted Joy Boy or the spirit of Joy Boy, the same thing that Luffy is awakening now. And they could have interpreted that the same way that they saw Fisher Tiger and the whole movement of the Sun Pirates. Or it was actually somebody before Joy Boy's time that then Joy Boy took up the spirit and being of, that now Luffy is taking up the spirit and being of. Or they're all one and the same person, and the fruit is what's actually housing the soul, depending on what devil fruits actually are. Because it seems very weird that most, if not all, people that get a devil fruit are perfectly suited to that fruit or very much wanted that fruit and therefore become very suited to that fruit. We don't really know what they are yet, obviously, but it seems very interesting. It seems very interesting to me that everyone that gets a devil fruit embodies that devil fruit to a very high degree. The same way that Luffy and his fruit match each other very well. The same way that Doflamingo and his fruit match each other very well. I find that very interesting, and I might do another video talking about that before we have the big drop next week, which might very well give us some big hints as to what devil fruits actually are. But as I was saying, a lot of things happened in this chapter. The drums of liberation is a very interesting thing to mention, because that is the beat of the heart of Joy Boy, because Zunisha did not mention any of this up until now, the whole time when he or she, I guess Zunisha is a he, particularly based on the voice that we heard, but the fact that Zunisha didn't mention anything about this before, this whole time up until now when Luffy was fighting Kaido, until he actually died, which must have been the trigger for whatever is happening, which is also very likely the reason for two things. One, Kaido wanting to die all the time, being that kind of character that he was, jumping off sky islands and getting captured all the time. And two, why Wano is so special. Because we've had two Straw Hats die. Well, one, neither of them really confirmed. One of them kind of confirmed, the other pretty much confirmed, being Luffy and Zoro. They could just be entirely dead right now. There's a great thing that Grand Line Review is talking about where Sanji has also died, but in more of a metaphorical sense, in the kind of person that he was and believes himself to be, which is really good. I highly recommend you go and check out Liam's review of this chapter because he's also got some interesting thoughts on this. But a monster trio all dying in some way and then being reborn stronger. So we know that Zoro was already stronger because he actually fought with Enma properly and unlocked his Conqueror's Haki and his advanced Conqueror's Haki and the coating and everything like that, and he's ridiculously strong. Then it looks like he actually died after that due to the Grim Reaper. Then he's going to come back and probably get some understanding on Ryuma and possibly more of the afterlife, and he might even know how to make a black blade, and he might even make all three of his swords black blades, putting him much higher up onto the level that Luffy is now going to be at. Because I thought Luffy was going to be pretty ridiculously strong after this before now, but now, whatever this is going to put him in a whole new category. So I'm pretty excited to see where it goes, but I think they're reaching new categories due to dying here on Wano specifically. So there must be something very particularly special about death and Wano, because we've seen a lot of things related to that recently, as well as Kaido specifically wanted to make his base here because Wano is particularly special. Now, what he actually means about this is still up in the air, and we're going to see about that. But it does seem very particularly strange that two of our Straw Hats have now died on this island, the same island that Kaido calls special, and the same guy who is always trying to kill himself. He also, when he knocked, home run Luffy straight off of Onigashima and into the water, he did say that it seems that you couldn't be Joy Boy either, which leads me to believe that being in a state of death or right on the brink of death is what activates or triggers Joy Boy's awakening in some sense. And how Kaido knows this, I have no idea if that is what's happening. But like I said, there's a lot of things happening. There's a lot of things to unpack. I just wanted to kind of get this conversation out there and get this chapter review out before Friday because I want to get it earlier rather than later. And then over the next week or so before the next chapter comes out, I can make a couple of other videos to discuss and kind of more in-depth go into these things that I'm thinking about. So just before I wrap up this episode, I did just want to talk about my video consistency and the timelines for my videos because I do want to get these out pretty soon after the chapter's release. I would like to stick to the official release if I can, particularly because of chapters like now, where there are some better translations in the official than they were in the unofficial. But I'm aiming kind of for Sundays or Saturdays would be best when the chapters are out. I don't really like going over the spoilers, but I do have quite a bit of work to do, and my work is not very consistent. It's not exactly a 9 to 5. There's work when there are recordings to do. So I don't always really have time to do it when the chapters come out, but I generally find some time a little bit later on in the week, which is why Thursdays are generally quite a good day for me to release them, because I can generally find the time by then to get it released. So one of the other reasons that these chapter reviews are generally quite late is because I'm also a beginner blacksmith. So I'm doing quite a few things outside of my work, as well as, wanting to make swords and weapons, some in particular. No spoilers, we'll get there when I'm good enough to make them. But I do quite enjoy making knives. I am still not very good at it, as you can plainly see, but it's a work in progress. And a lot of my time, even when I'm done at work, is spent on the premises there making more knives or polishing some of my knives or doing whatever I need to do in that regard, which is kind of what limits me on this. So then after that, I'll come home and then do my chapter reviews and do my streaming and things like that. I am streaming under the same name as this one, Shimotsuki Kajiya, over on Twitch. I'm doing Elden Ring at the moment, which I'm very much enjoying. It's a great game, very time consuming, and I'm very, very bad at it. But if you are interested in that, please go check it out. There is no stream consistency so far, but it's generally every day for the past couple of days when I've got some time that I can allot. But as I get further into this and get, my life slightly more organized, my knives, my work, these chapter reviews, other videos, and my streams will all get a little bit more consistent and possibly scheduled, but we'll see how that goes. So that's going to be it from me today. Thank you very much for watching. If you did make it all the way to the end of the video, let me know if there's anything else that I missed in the chapter, or anything that you disagree with, or something you might be able to explain a little bit better, or anything about the channel that you might want to just ask me about or tell me about. I'm still very new to this, but I'm quite enjoying it so far, and I appreciate the views. Thanks very much. Cheers.